The difference is you're not having to beat your body up as much. So we shouldn't feel guilty about not becoming debilitated in the process of gaining physique greatness, right? Debilitation and becoming handicapped isn't necessarily the price we have to pay for physique greatness. We can achieve physique greatness in a much better, smarter way.
What people need to remember that genetically we all respond to resistance exercise differently. We all have a different lifestyle, you know, stress level. We eat differently, we exercise differently. So those factors should not make them think that it's the exercise that was responsible for that development.
You're right. Genetics plays a big part in this.
Like out of anatomy, physics, and neurology, which one you started with, which led you to neurology?
No, it didn't quite work that way. I mean, that's too organized. It's sort of like it overlaps. It happens sort of all at once. I'll give you an example. Like when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, working at a Bill Pearl's gym, and I was working my deltoids, and I was experimenting, and I was paying attention and curious and fascinated. I remember setting a pulley very high, almost at hip height, and doing a side raise with that cable at about hip height. And I've always been very sort of tuned into what I was feeling. I could identify what I was feeling, whereas a lot of people don't quite know what they're feeling, where they're feeling it. I felt right away, this is heavier, harder in the early part and easier, lighter at the top part. And it feels really good. Why? Well, then you realize, physics is at play. A perpendicular force against the lever is more. A vertical or close to vertical, or excuse me, parallel, I should say, parallel with the direction of resistance is easier. But why would it matter? Well, it would matter because of a strength curve. It would matter because of anatomy. So that's the physics and that's the anatomy. It matters because the deltoid is stronger at the beginning and weaker at the end. Same with tricep kickback. Early on, when I was a kid, I realized, why is this so easy at the beginning and so hard at the end? Well, it's because the muscle is weaker at the end and stronger in the beginning, and the resistance you're giving it is the complete opposite, right? So there's another example of how physics meets anatomy or musculoskeletal function, which is anatomy. And then somewhere along the way, as you're doing more and more research, you hear something called bilateral deficit. What is that? Google it. You hear something about active insufficiency. What is that? Google it, all right? And then you realize, ironically, that all of these studies have already been done. All of this knowledge is already out there. Why don't bodybuilders know about it? Why don't trainers know about it? Because it hasn't been applied. What good does it do to discover something and then not make use of it? That's what this course does. This course makes use of it, explains that there's basically 16 factors that determine how good, how productive an exercise is and safe it is. 16 factors. That if you don't apply those 16 factors or some of those factors, that exercise will have compromised benefit. And if you apply all of those 16 factors, there won't be any compromise at all. You'll get maximum benefit, maximum efficiency, meaning the least amount of reward for the investment of energy and the least amount of risk of injury.
You know, I can almost hear it. There are many people right now who saying, okay, so if what you're saying is correct, how come our idols achieved great bodies, great shape? You know, they didn't know about this, they didn't apply it, but they still got great physique. You know, so here's the question. Let's say if at that time, what was normal is these exercises, the Brig 20 and, you know, and today some people start talking about, let's say, compound movement. What will be the reaction? How will that change, you know, the mentality of the people?
Well, look, first of all, let me just say that, you know, weight training is always productive. blanket statement. Weight training is always productive. What does that mean? That means any time that you make a muscle work, it's going to produce some benefit. So we're not talking about black and white. We're not talking about no benefit versus all benefit. We're talking about percentages of benefit, percentages of effort, and percentages of muscle load. That's what we're talking about. So if you do a bench press, the pectoral muscles do work, but they don't work as best as they could work because you're not getting a full range of motion, because you're not getting independent loading, right? There's a variety of things that are happening. For example, you know, people oftentimes compare how much they can bench press with how much they can do with a flat dumbbell press. And they say, how come I can bench press more than I can with a flat dumbbell press? Well, it's because it's a drastically different exercise. Just because you're pushing your arms in what appears to be the same direction does not mean it's the same exercise. On the dumbbell press, you're actually pulling the arm toward the center of the body. With a bench press, you're not pulling toward the center, you're actually pushing that way and that way, right? And if you were to put oil on that barbell, your hands would slide out. They wouldn't slide in, right? They would slide in if you were pulling, but you're not actually pulling. That would be the test. The reason you can, it's a proof that you're actually not pulling inward is that your hands would slide out if the bar had oil on it, right? So that means that you're creating what's called friction force. By having your hand attached to that barbell, you're engaging the tricep more than you would if you were doing a flat dumbbell press. You wouldn't be involving the triceps at all if you were doing dumbbell press, provided the forearm was vertical, right? So they're very, very different. So the problem is that when you get a bodybuilder, I won't name names, but we all know who they are.
Yes.
The greats.
Yes.
They have magnificent physiques. We know that they were supplementing, as many of us do. I won't deny that I have. And you take that combined with good genetics, combined with a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of time, and they're bound to get a result. If the result they have is the only proof that you think exists for whether or not their methods were good, that'd be like driving on a really, really rough road and having the proof that the road was good be that you arrived at your destination.
Right.
That isn't proof enough. That you arrived isn't proof enough. The question is, did you arrive as well as you could have arrived? As efficiently, with the least amount of wasted effort, with the least amount of risk of injury, the least wear and tear on your body. If you were to discover that you could have arrived just as well on a road that was smooth and dry and clear, right, you might realize then and only then that this method was not the only method and it was not the best method. But unless you understand that there's a better way, you will think this proves this works. And that's an illusion. That's not quite accurate.
Right. So that means...
Let me just interrupt real quickly here.
Yeah.
We have a strange psychological tendency to assume that, that in order for us to get maximum benefit, we have to really suffer. We have to pay an extraordinary price, right? People who are fans of Ronnie Coleman or Ronnie Coleman himself might say, I was 7 times Mr. Olympia. I was the biggest Mr. Olympia of all time. And the price of that was the fact that now my body is basically handicapped. That's the price I paid, right? And some people would say, well, yeah, because his level of development was unlike any other. So the price had to be extraordinary, right? But at the end of the day, each of those muscles that were working didn't know what was happening outside their body. All they knew was they were experiencing a certain amount of load, let's say maximum load. They didn't know if that maximum load was being comprised of 30% of 300 pounds or 90% of 100 pounds. Either way, it's 90 pounds, right? So a muscle only knows maximum load. If you can get maximum muscle load with less weight because you're using better physics, better mechanics, better exercises to get a bigger percentage of the load that you're using onto that muscle, the muscle is going to gain just the same. The difference is you're not having to beat your body up as much. So we shouldn't feel guilty about not becoming debilitated in the process of gaining physique greatness, right? Debilitation and becoming handicapped isn't necessarily the price we have to pay for physique greatness. We can achieve physique greatness in a much better, smarter way.
Right. So this is what people need to remember, that genetically we all respond to resistance exercise differently. We all have a different lifestyle, you know, stress level. We eat differently. We exercise differently. So those factors should not make them think that it's the exercise that was responsible for that development.
Look, I mean, you're right. Genetics plays a big part in this, right? So what happens sometimes is that a person with not so good genetics, who's been doing, let's say, traditional exercises, is unhappy with their arm development. And then they see someone like, you know, Larry Scott or, you know, whoever you want to pick that has magnificent arms. And they see that, you know, Larry Scott had big arms and he did preacher barbell curls. It might make that person think that the exercise they haven't been doing, preacher barbell curls, is the key. And they're influenced by that thought because that guy does preacher curls and he has big arms. If you understand biomechanics and you understand the difference between a preacher barbell curl and a standard barbell curl and just basic anatomy, you'd realize that it makes no difference to the bicep. It doesn't know, or at least it doesn't perceive it as better when you're doing a preacher barbell curl. It's different. It's different in a not so good way. There's a higher risk of injury. There's also, you know, a different resistance curve, which means it gives you less resistance at a different time in the range of motion when you might actually benefit from having it. But the point is that for someone that doesn't have great genetics, you're basically doing a crapshoot if you're thinking, well, maybe I'll try this, maybe I'll try this, maybe I'll try this. The best thing to do is to understand what constitutes best from a mechanical, anatomical, and neurological standpoint. Once you know, once you understand, once it makes sense, what is a good exercise and what isn't, then you know that at least you're doing the most you can possibly do. And if the gains don't come, then it's a matter of genetics, but at least you're doing the optimal stuff.
Right.
That's what's critically important. Now, on top of that, nutrition plays a role in that. Physiology, meaning the frequency, the sets, the reps, aside from exercise selection, then other things can be improved upon. Yes, that's true. But in terms of exercise selection, knowing biomechanics lets you know that the exercises you've selected are truly the most productive and why they're the most productive. In a logical, sensible way, you can understand why, and then at least you don't have to wonder if maybe you're doing the wrong exercises.
Right. So you heard it. If you're not genetically gifted, you should first start selecting the best exercises, and then let genetic decide.
Yeah. You know, if you're someone who is genetically gifted, and we see this unfortunately a lot, I've seen people do ridiculous exercises, right? And yet they're still more muscular than most people would be if they did those same exercises, right? That's genetics, right? Not Ronnie Coleman, but Phil Heath was a basketball player before he became a bodybuilder. As a basketball player, I don't know if some of you have seen those pictures, he was more muscular than a lot of novice bodybuilders.
Yeah, I did see.
He was genetically gifted from the beginning, right? So if you only looked at that, you would say, oh boy, I got to play basketball because it'll make me really muscular, right? Martina Navratilova, I don't know if you know that name. Martina,
oh yeah, of course.
Of course, you're in the tennis world.
I'm a tennis
right?
player. Right.
Yeah. You know, she was very muscular. And so she was muscular because of genetics.
And she's still
very muscular because of genetics. And if you didn't know that, you would say, well, tennis must make you, well, Billie Jean King wasn't very muscular. Yep. Chrissy Everett wasn't very muscular. What's his name? What's the name of the guy that used to throw the tantrums? He used to yell at the referees. What are you talking about?
McEnroe.
Yeah, John McEnroe. If you saw John McEnroe walking down the street and you didn't know who he was, you wouldn't even think he was an athlete,
Right.
much less a world champion tennis player.
We'll think he's a
Right?
commentator.
Yeah, as he is now, right? Or just an average guy, right? So genetics does play a big role. So we cannot just make the automatic assumption that someone who looks good is doing the right exercises, because genetics plays a big factor. And very often someone is doing an exercise that is, to say suboptimal is an understatement, sometimes, worthless.
Right.
And they can still look good, not because of that exercise, possibly because of the other ones they're also doing. But we cannot make the assumption. We have to understand the why, the how. And this stuff is very logical and sensible, by the way. It's not just like I tell you this or you tell them that, and it's like, trust us. No, I mean, you can test this. You can measure it. You can test it. It's logical. It's sensible. It makes sense.
Yes. Back to what you were saying, like you have to do research and, try things. Some people, are getting certified, they are looking for to become a better trainer, to learn, but most the associations, they don't provide this type of knowledge, and for years now. Why this knowledge is not available in certain course, except for in our course?
That's a good question. I would say it's a little bit politically fraught, meaning that it's hard to answer that question accurately and not implicate that something is wrong with the course givers. In other words, it is sensible, it is reasonable for an organization who is going to certify a trainer to teach biomechanics. Why? Because the majority of personal trainers are involved in teaching resistance exercise. In other words, the only ones who aren't doing resistance exercise are the people who are only coaching aerobics, cardiovascular. Actually, you could even find biomechanics in an aerobic class, right? Because we're still dealing with body weight. But the fact is that it's gotten a little better in time. I mean, when I was certified with ACSM, American College of Sports Medicine, 30 years ago, I went through this course. It was a 3-day course. They taught us a lot of things. 0 biomechanics.
Why is that?
And the reason is because it's complex. The reason is because there's a commercial reason why trainer associations exist, right? Meaning that these organizations want to be able to get as many trainers taking their course and attending their annual conventions as possible, because the industry grows with revenue. So the trainer associations rely on trainer income. Trainers rely on client income, right? Everything sort of rolls, right? So everyone's relying on everybody else. If you tried to have a course that some people would be intimidated to take, then you would have a lot fewer people taking the course and giving you their money. If you had a course that a lot of people maybe couldn't pass, then again, you would have a lot of people. But that would be like saying, let's just make everybody an MD, a medical doctor. Never mind whether they can actually pass the difficult courses, right? Well, being a trainer is a responsibility. You are taking people's safety into your hands, not just, their muscular development, the rate of their muscular development. You know that it is more difficult to be a hairstylist, a professional hairstylist, than it is to be a professional trainer in terms of legality or credential. If you want to be in the United States, I'm sure it's in the United States, maybe just California, but I'm pretty sure it's the United States. If you want to be a hairstylist, you have to take an approved 1,200-hour course.
1,200.
And then you get a license, you get a certificate that demonstrates that you went through the course. Now, arguably, you could be you could be a hairstylist and not put your clients at the kind of risk that a trainer would put his client at risk.
Right.
But yet you don't need 1,200 hours of a certified course in order to legally be a trainer.
Right.
You can just put a shirt on that says trainer. And if depending on the circumstances of the gym where you're working, some gyms just say, hey, I don't care if you're certified or not. I don't care what you know. Your client is your business. As long as that client signs a disclaimer that I, the gym owner, am not on the hook. And as long as you're providing me with proof of insurance. Okay, so all they're worried about is liability, right? So there are people out there that just say, okay, fine, I'll get my trainer insurance. I'll train my clients. And I know nothing about biomechanics. I know nothing about safety. I know nothing about efficacy, how productive an exercise is. I know nothing about alignment. I know nothing about a resistance curve. I know nothing about bilateral deficit. I know nothing. I've never even heard those words before. But I'm going to go out there and I'm going to help people get in shape with exercise that I'm not even entirely familiar with. I think I am because I've spent a lot of time in the gym, but I don't actually understand the science of this stuff. And all I care about is paying my rent. Well, that's almost as bad as a doctor saying, I don't care about how safe my patients are as long as I can pay my rent. Right? So we, as an industry, really need to take responsibility for ourselves. If we want to be respected as an industry, we need to take responsibility for the risk that we carry on behalf of our clients. Right? We cannot be careless about this. You know, we have to understand that it's not enough to just know how to do a bench press, how to do an overhead press, how to do a barbell squat or a deadlift. That's not enough. That's not nearly enough.
And work hard.
Yeah. You think that just because you know your client suffered and your client sweated and your client, you know, that client got their money's worth? No, that client did not get their money's worth. You did that client a disservice.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Because I see many, you know, at one point I was one of them, you know, pushing them hard and stuff, but there is more into that, you know. And you know what, Doug, the problem doesn't stop there, because if you go to a gym and you look at the equipment that is available there, you will notice that many machines are not well designed. Therefore, you know, it creates problems just by sitting in the machine and start using it, even with lightweight.
Yeah. You know, again, you know, so much of the world depends on money.